Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast, where we dive into real conversations that help leaders grow, teams flourish, and organisations thrive. I'm your host, Claire Gray, Leadership and Team Facilitator at Thriving Culture. I'm also the author of Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently, and Thriving Teams, When Teams Unite, Align and Achieve. This podcast is filled with practical tools, tips, actions, and insights that you can immediately apply so you can lead confidently. I interview thought leaders from across the globe. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Today, I'm joined by Zach Mercurio, a researcher, speaker, and leadership development facilitator whose work centres on purposeful leadership, meaningful work, and what it really means to matter at work. Zach is author of The Power of Mattering and The Invisible Leader, and he works with leaders and organisations all over the world. He's actually about to come to Australia, where I live, to build cultures where people feel valued, motivated, and able to do their best work. What I particularly love about Zach's work is how he brings the research and evidence together with really practical and grounded insights that you can really easily apply. And I knew I needed to get Zach on the podcast when I had 3 guests in a row mention his work as well. So I'm really looking forward to exploring the ideas around mattering with you today. So welcome, Zach.
Thanks, Claire. It's really good to be here.
Yeah. So you were just saying a little bit about you coming to Australia. What's the plan when you come to Oz?
Yeah, I'm bringing my whole family along for this work trip. We're going to be in Sydney for a couple days, then we're heading over to Perth. We're speaking at a summit called Constellations. It's the first conference that they've ever done, and it's all around human-centered work design. So I'm really excited about it.
Awesome. Sounds really, really interesting. So in my podcast, there's only 2 questions that I always ask at the start and at the very end, and everything in between is different depending on the guest and having a conversation. And I realized when I was looking at the first question, I talk about mattering in some respects, my first question. So I'd love to hear your story, Zach, and for the people who might be new to your work, how you describe what you do and why it matters. Why does mattering matter?
Well, first, to matter is a survival instinct as human beings. In fact, it's our first instinct. Nobody would be listening to this podcast right now if we all hadn't mattered enough to another human being to keep us alive. So it is as primal of an instinct, that instinct to be important to other people, as is sleeping or eating. And as we grow up, as we go to work, as we enter into community and school, that instinct to matter turns into this fundamental need to feel seen, heard, valued, and needed by those around us. And it really never goes away. How I got into this work is that I saw both the absence of mattering and the presence of mattering for some of the people that I was researching. Specifically, my first study was with a group of cleaners, janitors at a university, and we embedded ourselves with them for a year and a half. And this is a very difficult job, often overlooked, often invisible. And we were trying to understand what characteristics led to some janitors in objectively the same job coming to experience high levels of meaningfulness and purpose in their work, vitality in their work. And then for the others who just saw it as just a paycheck or they were just trying to get by, what was the difference? And one of the things that we consistently found was that there were small moments with another, most specifically a leader, who helped them see how what they were doing, how whatever task they were doing inevitably affected someone else. We've come to call that our so that mentality, because people who were thriving could say, I'm doing this so that what, and could link that to its bigger outcome. But then we also noticed that these custodians who were thriving tended to have regular interactions in which they were seen, they felt heard, people called them by their names, they remembered things about their life, they felt noticed. But on the flip side, those who were languishing and struggling tended to feel overlooked, invisible, ignored, did not have leaders that showed them the evidence of their significance regularly. And so that study really launched us into looking at what creates these moments of mattering in our lives and in our work. And during that time, as we were doing this research, more and more signals started happening and coming from the world that was indicating that we're in a mattering deficit. I mean, more people than ever worldwide say they feel invisible, especially at work. Upwards of 65% of people say they feel underappreciated or undervalued. And employee engagement is at its lowest rate that it's ever been. And just 39% of people in the latest Gallup organization study on engagement said that someone at work cared for them as a person. We're more connected than ever, but we're lonelier than ever. And what we're really facing is a deficit of these interactions that help us feel significant, to fill that survival instinct. And that's what led me here.
Wow. So how did you decide on choosing the janitors at a university? How did you start there in your research? I'm really curious.
I was struggling with a research interest. It was an organizational development program. This was already my third career. I had a career in advertising, and I became more interested in why people were so miserable in that job and I got more interested in how people were working than the work itself. That's when I realized I could study this. So I came back to study like meaningfulness and how to make work better. And so I was struggling with this research interest. And it came to me, one of the things when you're in a PhD program, you get very familiar with academic buildings and who's in them. And the people I would see all the time were the cleaners. And I remember one day I was going to a professional development conference. You'd get these free trainings as, graduate students and staff members. And I was going to a free training and I saw a janitor that I had seen time and time again. And I passed her by and she said, "Hey, what are you doing today? What's up?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to a free training. It's open to anybody." And she goes, "Oh, how'd you hear about that?" I said, "Oh, it's in my email." And she visibly got emotional. She goes, "I've been here for 10 years. No one's ever shown me how to get my email up and running."
It's always those little small things, isn't it?
Right. And so I asked her, I was like, "Wait a minute, tell me more." She's like, "Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen my supervisor in a week and a half. Your direct leader." She goes, "I don't see anybody. I don't talk to anybody." And I was like, whoa, this is a whole subset of that makes this university run. And in fact, 80% of the world's workforce is in frontline service occupations. And so I wanted to know, so what are the predictors of people who experienced meaningfulness and mattering in their work versus people who didn't, like this person in front of me? And how can we use that data to teach leaders how to make sure that that experience is never experienced again, that janitor was telling me about?
Because you talked about people feeling invisible or underappreciated, which I'm sure that janitor that you spoke to did feel. Why do you think it's more prevalent that everyone feels more isolated and lonely, even though we have all the resources to be more connected?
Well, one of the reasons why we've simply gotten worse at seeing, hearing, and valuing each other. And one of the reasons why is that for 25 years, we've used technology to communicate with one another in short transactions.
Mm.
So, for example, if you give me some bad news, I can now go on a Slack messaging platform, Team, Zoom, or send you a text message and just say, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Claire," and put a sad faced emoji. And then I think I've done my moral duty. There's a couple problems with that. Every time I do that, I get out of the social situation in which I practice the skill of showing compassion, seeking understanding, practicing empathy. In psychology, there's a concept called skill decay. And what it shows is that a cognitive or social skill can decay within 4 to 8 days of not using it.
Oh, wow.
So think about how many times over the last 25 years collectively we've gotten out of the social repetitions needed to build these skills of showing compassion and connecting with one another.
Okay.
I call it the skills shortage no one is talking about, which is the skills to see and understand and value each other, show compassion, demonstrate empathy. And that's very likely why, the World Economic Forum finds that the top 10 most in demand skills by 2030, on number 10 was technological literacy. Number 2 and 3 and 4 were active listening, seeking understanding, curiosity, all of the things that restore these relationships. That's one, and that's major, the skills deficit. Number 2 is that our attention spans are shorter than ever. And we tend to think about that in terms of how well we're performing on tasks. But Gloria Marx, she's a researcher, she found that about 10 years ago, our attention span was about 2.5 minutes that we could spend on one thing without getting distracted. But now it's about 47 seconds. after she replicated those studies 2 years ago. Think about what that does for the person in front of us. For example, physicians and their patients have been measured in studies. They ask physicians, how much time do you let your patient speak before you interrupt them? And the physicians said, about a minute and a half. But for patients, on average, globally, it's down to about 11 seconds before they're interrupted. And then the third reason why is that we've labeled these things soft. Anytime your brain sees something as soft or simple, you're susceptible to an overconfidence bias. We think we're better at it than we are. One of the reasons why I think, in looking at the data, people are so disengaged in work, for example, is we've expected people to care so long without doing the rigorous work to make sure they feel cared for. And here we are in a time where people feel more overlooked than ever, when we need these skills more than ever. So I think that we need a massive upskilling on these human skills to care.
It's so interesting. We were having a conversation just yesterday with my son, who's 8, because the week before he was messing around in his tennis lesson. And we've got some family values that we have around like respect and kindness. And we're talking about respect and kindness. And it was funny because when we were describing the behavior that we wanted, and maybe because I've recently listened to your book as well, it was front of mind. And I was like, a better way to think about it is like, how do you make your tennis teacher feel like they matter, like they're valued, like they're in front of you teaching you stuff? And it was just really interesting because we were describing all these words that described respect and kindness and caring and all of that. And it was really about mattering and people feeling valued. And I thought it was quite timely, given I was meeting with you, to kind of share that story, because I think we need to be teaching our children these skills. We need to be demonstrating these skills as leaders. And what I'm noticing, and even a really senior leader I was speaking to at the end of last year was sharing, he's a very senior executive, owns a business, and was talking about the fact that he feels more connected with his clients than necessarily with his employees, because he feels like he needs to have separation from a work-life balance and not pry into people's lives. So he goes, I know that I feel detached from the people that work for me. And we we're talking about what the impact of that was, because he says that he doesn't feel that way with his clients. And so it's interesting, I guess, the reactions that different levels of leaders have to the relationships they hold with the people that they work with, and how they might feel disconnected, whether that's because they feel that their people might be entitled, and how their people feel that back. Hearing that one's coming up for you.
Yeah, there's a couple things there. One, I'm really glad that you're working with your 8-year-old on that. I have an 8-year-old and a 11-year-old. And one of the reasons why there's so many leaders out there right now who don't really know how to come to know their people is because of the lack of social repetitions growing up, of actually having to do it. So, when I look at some of the solutions to our leadership challenge, I look at education and making sure that parents and teachers have an obligation to make sure that kids are getting the social repetitions to show the people around them that they matter, so they can practice and develop that skill.
Mhm.
It's something as simple as, can you go tell the waiter that served your food why you liked the food? That's a skill, that's affirmation, right? And we tend to lose that because we get handed now a device that we can just pay remotely and just like put in our tip. We don't even have to say anything. We just give it back to them. Like, I
Yeah.
get that handheld device. So a lot of these things they've been making it more efficient for us to be people, but we're forgetting how to be people to people. We're
Yeah.
forgetting that we're getting out of these social reps. So anytime you can give your kid a social repetition to say, affirm somebody, show somebody real gratitude, or hey, go tell that person what you appreciate about them, or what they're doing for you. Or, I was at a restaurant and my one of my kids spilled their food, and I said, hey, I just want you to like think about the person who has to come clean that up because you threw that, and how would you feel if you did that? So allowing them to practice empathy. Those things are so important to rebuilding these skills at all levels of society.
Yeah. It's so important. You're actually making me reflect. We just came back from 3 weeks in Japan, and Japan's such a amazing culture, and it was such a great experience for my boys, Jackson and Harvey, who are 11 and 8.
Do you know
But
my 8-year-old's name is Jackson?
I actually did know that because I listened to your book and you share a
Oh,
story
great.
about Jackson. So we obviously have a lot in common with our kids' ages, but also great names for our kids as well.
Yeah.
And what I really noticed, because you gave the example of like from a service perspective and showing empathy, but when you go to a culture like Japan, it's offensive to tip in Japan because service is their job and they have such pride in the work that they do, and it really matters and it shows it matters. And then we come back to Australia and, Australia's a lovely place. You're about to come, you've been before. But even from the time I landed at the airport to getting to my car, there was all these interactions of people showing each other they didn't matter. Like,
I
someone
know.
was getting off the bus at the back and it's like, you need to use the front door, or someone didn't hold the lift for the other person and they got shirty, and all these behaviors. And because I'd come from one culture to another, it was so stark, the difference between the two. And I think that just observing these things and calling them out and having conversations with the kids about that in the car on the way back was interesting in itself.
Yeah, and I also wanna go back to your executive senior leader
Yeah.
example too, in which, he said he doesn't wanna pry into the lives of people, but then work-life balance, but then he feels this detachment. I mean, we really can't lead people that we don't understand, right? And you can't serve something or care for something that you don't understand. You can care about people from afar, right? But to
Yeah.
care for someone requires that we have to get up close. There's no shortcut.
Yeah.
You have to get up close. You have to come to know people as people before employees in order to lead them well. And so one of the byproducts that that leader is probably feeling is that detachment from the people that he or she is leading, that they don't understand anymore. And it's like this barrier of understanding. And then you said something else that people might get entitled if you show them how much they matter and get entitlement is actually a response behavior, and it's the response to perpetual experiences of not mattering.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think it's very important to understand that when people don't feel that they matter, especially in work, there's two behaviors that result. They will either withdraw, so they'll stop information with you, they'll stay silent, they'll keep their ideas and feedback to themselves, which can be disastrous in organizations, or they leave. I mean, the terminal withdrawal response to feeling insignificant is leaving an organization. We've called
Yeah.
it turnover, but you can call it anything you want. When somebody feels insignificant, they will leave.
Yeah.
That's the prime reason why people leave when you really think about it. They either
Yeah.
see unseen or unvalued by the organization or a leader. Or it can result in acts of desperation. "Hey, I matter more than you think. Let me show you." That's an entitlement behavior. And oftentimes, some people here in the States say, "Oh, I'm not gonna give, like, younger generations, like, participation trophies." Well, it's no surprise that this generation is the loneliest generation that reports the lowest quality interactions. They would not need a participation trophy to give them worth if they felt worthy every day
Yeah.
in your workplace, in your society, in families, in communities. So, I mean, we are partly responsible for creating the behaviors we say we don't want. Entitlement is a reaction to anti-mattering.
Yeah. It's an interesting one because I can see both sides of the experience. You might have an organization, and I'm thinking of a different leader now, where people come to expect a certain level of reward, employee conditions, etc., and that becomes the baseline. And then sometimes, and from the organization's perspective, they feel like people are taking advantage of that, maybe pushing the boundaries with flexible work and working from home and not doing what's required. And then at the same time, maybe the reaction to that is people actually feel and notice that they don't value or they don't matter because the reaction of the leaders of what they're perceiving that's going on. And I think a lot of the time of what's actually happening is this perception because we're actually not having conversations. And it might go back to
Mhm.
the World Economic Forum capabilities that you spoke about actively listening and being curious, and all the things we know drive good leadership capabilities and a good discussions between people within teams. And I feel like we default then to not having the conversation, to the fight or flight responses that you described before, which makes it challenging to kind of move forward together. And then you get in this kind of stalemate position between the organization or the leader and the team. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great I mean, that what we're talking about is understanding.
Mhm.
The ability to seek understanding before we evaluate and label and oversimplify. Because the problem is that once you start seeing an employee as, oh, they just take advantage of this, or they're inherently like not wanting to work hard. The way you see people is the way you treat them, and the way that you treat them is who they become. I mean, it's called the Pygmalion effect. It's been well studied that if you start seeing somebody as an issue, as a problem, you treat them that way, Like, you start treating people as if they can't be trusted. Like, a lot of organizations have said, "Oh, people don't perform well when they're working remotely." Well, what does that say about your view of people?
Yeah.
I think people are inherently lazy without monitoring, without being physically present. When
Yeah.
people feel that way, guess how they're gonna act?
Yeah.
They're gonna act as if they're a problem to you. And then I think leaders have to realize that they're generally complicit in creating the conditions and behaviors they usually say they don't want. And, like, for example, Brené Brown, when talking about how we, like, shame Gen Xers I mean, when we shame, like, Gen Zers or, uh, millennials, and which I'm one of the first ones, uh, we can't forget that you raised them. Like,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
many people are complaining about the behaviors raised them. So it's very important, I think, to cut through that noise, and that's why I like the work we do with Mattering, because I've been in a room with people of multiple generations, a company with people of multiple leadership styles, and I've asked this question, raise your hand if you'd prefer to feel unimportant,
Has anyone
and
ever raised their
no
hand?
one has
Yeah.
ever raised their hand.
Yeah.
I don't care if they're the most results-oriented senior leader, no one has ever raised their hand. So the question becomes, okay, this is a universal need. How do people here feel important? How do they feel that their work is important, that they're significant?
Mm.
And usually once you can get to that universal truth that we all want to feel seen, heard, valued, and needed, and people may experience it in different ways, and we have to ask and seek understanding, then we start getting somewhere. But just telling people they can't be trusted, or you're seeing people, employees, as wanting to take advantage of you, that is a very self-limiting belief that actually limits your ability to lead them well.
And so how do you recommend a leader reframes that mindset if you do hold these negative beliefs about the people in front of you, which gets felt by that person? What do you suggest a leader does?
Well, I like looking at the data. I mean, the data is very clear. People's performance and productivity in work is not a function of where, when, how they work, and even what they do while they're working. It's a byproduct of what they experience while they're working. And the number one experience, the number one predictor of whether an employee is going to be perform well, is going to be productive, is whether they feel seen, heard, valued, and supported by a leader. Nick Bloom at Stanford, who's studied remote work, can find no conclusions in the data about, like, whether a remote worker is more productive or not as productive. But what he does find is that how they are managed makes all the difference,
Yeah.
regardless of where they are. So that's something that all leaders can control, is the experience of working. We experience work through relationships. All work is creative human relationships. We're in relationship with one another and creating something out of those relationships. So if you and your leaders aren't rigorously pursuing those skills to cultivate high quality relationships in which people feel seen, heard, valued, and needed, then it's very unlikely that they're going to consistently add value. And I think this is what's important for leaders to understand about Mattering, or just all of us, parents, coaches, all of us. We've had this belief in work for a half century that people should be valued once they add value. So we won't say this, but there's a subconscious belief that, hey, once someone adds value enough or performs or produces, then we'll give them a raise or a perk or benefits, or they've put in their time. But psychologically, we know very clearly and very convincingly that the opposite is true. People need to be valued to add value. That when people feel seen, heard, valued, and needed, they develop these two beliefs that psychologists find are predictive of performance over time: the belief that I'm worthy and the belief that I'm capable. So I have that support needed. And the more we feel those beliefs, the more we confidently add value, the more we see how we add value, the more we feel valued. And that's the upward spiral. I mean, if I'm talking to an executive, I would say, think about the last time that you energetically pursued something when you felt that you or it did not matter. It's very hard to find a time. And that's because behavior follows the belief that we and our actions in some way make a difference to someone.
Mm. Which goes back to where you started, where you talked about the so that. Like the so that is really like the impact. And I like it's such an easy thing to remember to add a so that when you're describing something, because it kind of then draws the meaning and the impact to what you're doing.
But for leaders, I think a key role of a leader is to be an architect of that so that. So
Mm.
there's a Scottish theologian who wrote, "A river's source knows nothing of where it leads." So it's very hard for us to see our downstream impact. But leaders often have the data to see how an individual contributor's efforts have led to X, Y, and Z happening down the line. And that's what I mean. It's a skill to be able to show somebody they're so that, to give
Mm.
them the evidence that their unique gifts are making a unique difference down the line. But if leaders never develop that skill, if they're never expected to deliver that skill, if they are not evaluated on that skill, for example, then we're leaving up to chance that people will just be self-motivated. But it's
Mm.
very hard, but we're motivated by seeing our impact. And it's very hard to see our impact if we don't get the proof of our impact.
Yeah.
And that's what leaders who create mattering tend to do. They tend to regularly give people proof of their unique impact.
Yeah. And I even know because, like, my team that I lead is remote, like, we're not all in the same location. And probably 18 months ago, like, I train leaders on giving feedback and holding people accountable and all the things and building relationships. And even I had this realization when we were doing a teaming session with my team that I needed to be more intentional with positive feedback and links to mattering with my team so that they knew where they stood. Like, it wasn't just assumed. And sometimes you kind of need these circuit breakers or have these discussions so that you actually do realize it. You mentioned a couple of signals before about someone quitting. That's always a good sign that maybe you've made someone feel like they don't matter, or people withdrawing. Are there other signals or warnings that leaders should look for to know that maybe they're not letting their people feel like they matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think like gossip is one interesting
Mhm.
one.
Yeah.
So if people are venting to each other, which can be good and healthy, but if people are like negatively gossiping with one another about each other behind people's backs and you hear about that, that's usually a signal of anti-mattering. One of the number one predictors of negative workplace gossip, for example, is this concept. It's called psychological contract violation. What that means is that my expectation of fair treatment has been violated. So
Mm.
I don't feel that I can speak up to you anymore, so I'm going to go speak out to someone else. Again, we will do anything to find someone who sees, hears, and values us, even if it's on negative terms.
Mm.
So, a lot of complaining, blaming, grumbling, a lot of those things are usually ways a human being tries to get the attention they're not getting or they
Yeah.
perceive that they're not getting. That's why some of the most toxic employees that organizations and leaders have asked me to work with, when I really dig down deep into it, they are also the ones who feel the most unseen, unheard, and undervalued.
Mm.
And some people will say, well, Zach, like these are like narcissistic people or they're toxic people. Well, less than 1% of the world is narcissistic. So it's much more likely that their behavior is indicative of your environment than them just being a bad person or something pathologically wrong with them. So some of those toxic behaviors you can look into as, are these signals of insignificance in some way? If you lead a remote team and everybody's won't turn on their camera, that's a sign, right? Because some people have said to me, like, Zach, my people don't turn on their camera remotely, and I say, well, do you make it worth it to do that? What do you do in your meetings? And usually the agendas I get is like, it's update fests. We
Mm.
just go around to give updates or we exchange information. We don't ask how people are doing. We don't ask, like, how can we work better together? As you mentioned, teaming. And so you have to make it worth it for people to turn on their cameras, for example. So if everybody's sort of like disengaging, withdrawing in that way, not wanting to engage, if you have that thought, I ask my people for feedback all the time and no one answers that, that's a good signal. Another good signal for you, it's a good test. I call it the phone call test. If you were to call one of your direct reports out of the blue in the middle of the day, what do you think their first reaction would be? If it's some version of terror or panic or fear, you have a problem. The problem is not that you're a bad leader. The problem is that too many interactions with that person have probably been transactional. You're asking them for something, you're asking something from them, you're asking them for an update, which almost always produces a self-protective defensive response. So think about, in any other realm of human life, would it be normal for someone to experience fear or anxiety when you called them and have a healthy relationship? It's not. So
Yeah.
think about how you can make those interactions more transformational, asking about how they're doing, checking in on something you remembered about them or their work. checking in on if you notice they're frustrated in a meeting, asking, "Hey, I noticed you were frustrated in that meeting. Is that right?" And those taking a genuine interest in another human being in a way that in an interaction in which you're not asking them for something or not checking in on their work is so important to building trust and reducing that fear.
Yeah. It's interesting because you think about leaders that only pick up the phone when there's something wrong. And of course, they're going to get a fear response from people too. And then even asking to get to know each other and thinking about the leader I spoke about earlier, they've essentially been in a sales role before, and they're probably really good at taking notes about their clients and what's happening with their kids and what they spoke about, and actually being quite intentional and thoughtful about that. So when they speak to them the next time, they're building their relationship. But do we actually do the same with our people that we lead internally? And how do we actually create those mechanisms to do those things so people do feel valued?
Yeah,
Yeah.
our inherent need to matter to one another in relationships does not go away because we're in work relationships.
Yeah.
This is like the false dichotomy of work and life. Like a human being is alive wherever they're thinking and breathing, right? So life
Yeah.
occurs at work,
Yeah.
and the same psychological needs follow us to work. It's a false you c- it you know you compartmentalization is one of the hardest things to do psychologically. It's virtually impossible because the way we make meaning in one place affects how we make meaning in another place. So those same psychological needs us into work. So think about how ridiculous it would be to think about maintaining a great friendship with someone who only calls you when something's wrong, or how ridiculous it would be to maintain a good relationship with somebody who only asks you for things, right? It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yet we do it at work all the time. And then we expect people to add value. We expect people to commit. We expect loyalty from people that we haven't checked in on about their parent who's in the hospital and their caretaker in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah. And what do you say to leaders that feel like they need to kind of draw the line and not pry into people's personal lives and all that sort of stuff? What's your advice to them?
Yeah, I'm not an advocate for being not an advocate for being everybody's best friend. I'm not an advocate for being a therapist. That's not a leader's role. I'm not an advocate for digging deep beneath the surface. I'm an advocate for giving people the space to be human, the full human that they are in work, and to have the opportunity to have their energy levels, their emotional levels, their lives and work known by someone else. It's providing that space for people to know that someone sees and understands them. Uh, you're not prying into someone's personal life by asking them, "Hey, I wanted to, check in on like energy on my team today. How's everybody doing?" That's not prying into someone's personal life. That's data to understand somebody. For example, one of my clients is an airline, and I like flying, but um, I always feel better when I see the pilot go and check on the plane. They put their vest on and they go do the walk outside the plane. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, they got it." I have a friend who works at the airline that do work with, and I had this thought. I asked him, I called him just kind of for fun, and I said, "Hey, who checks on the pilot every day?" And there was this, like, pause. Like, they do self questionnaires or self checks, but there's no system within the airline to check on the human beings that are actually responsible for the equipment.
Sounds
And why is
crazy.
that important, right? It's crazy. But if that's not happening in an airline, it's not happening elsewhere. But, like, one of the practices that I typically, invite people to do and that I've seen work and the evidence shows that it works is like a green, yellow, red check-in. Red is you're offline, it's hard to be present. There's too many things pulling at your attention. Yellow means there's things stressing you out, but you can be present. Green means you're present. You're able to be here, you're in flow, you're at your best today. The goal of the leader is not to psychoanalyze people or change their color if you do this check-in. The goal is just to be aware because here's what happens. Say you and I, Claire, do this check-in and you're a red. Do you think as a leader that I'm gonna vigorously debate a project you're working on that day in front of everybody on the team?
Well, hopefully not. No. No.
Probably not because I know that.
Mm,
Or as we go into our next meeting, do you think I'm gonna look at you and think, "Oh gosh, Claire's a red. I hope she figures that one out." Or am
mm,
I more likely to say, "Hey, I noticed you're a red. Anything I can do to help?"
yeah.
Right? The goal is not to change the color or to make everybody a green. The goal is that when you have this awareness, like energy and emotions in people's states, that is data. It's not noise for a leader.
Mm.
And if you're missing out on that data and that noise of the details of, if you're missing out on that data and you consider it noise, you consider people's personal life noise that gets in the way of your efficient system, you're missing out on data to actually regenerate the energy needed to keep that system going, which is human beings.
Yeah, which is essentially your most important asset. So, like, obviously, mattering links really closely to inclusion and belonging and recognition and purpose and other things. But how does it differ? How is it the same? How is it interlinked?
Yeah, it's very important to know the difference because there's been a lot of focus on inclusion and belonging. Well, I have elementary school kids, so I mean, the best example I can give is a school recess example. Because recess drama is always top of mind. Who gets picked to play in the games? What game we're playing? But belonging is being picked for the team, right? Belonging is being welcomed and connected and part of a group. Inclusion is being asked to play in the game. Inclusion is being invited and able to take an equal, equitable role in a group. But mattering is feeling that the team would not be complete without you, right? Mattering is feeling significant to members of that group. So belonging is feeling part of, but mattering is feeling significant to. The reason why this is important is because I could feel that I belong on a team. I could feel part of the team. You could be doing all of the social events that you want or have like a good Slack channel or whatever it is. I could feel that I'm included on the team, that I'm represented. I can use my voice. But maybe I'm a caretaker for a parent and nobody notices. Maybe I have never been told or reflected back to what my unique gifts are relative to other people on the team. I mean, think about the people on your team. When's the last time you named a unique gift that they bring to the table relative to other people? Right? Maybe I can feel like I belong or I'm included, but I'm never shown the downstream impact that I make or why I'm uniquely needed on the team or how I'm missed when I'm gone. So we could feel like we belong and feel like that we're included, but not feel that we matter to each other. And the reason why this is important is because mattering happens in interpersonal interactions. It doesn't, you can't do it through a program. You can't do it through a perk. You can't do it through a good benefit or a really nice office space. You can't make someone feel that they matter through a salary increase. You can only make someone feel that they matter through an interaction. And it's that interactional level that's been becoming lower and lower quality in many organizations today.
Mm. So, thinking at the teaming level, how does mattering influence psychological safety within a team?
Psychological safety is the secure base, right? It's relational insurance, I like to call it. The idea of insurance, like when you go out and drive your car, you're not constantly thinking, if I get in a wreck, I'm screwed, or if I get in a wreck, I have to pay for this. And the reason why is because likely you have insurance. If you don't have insurance, you're often like, whoa, you're nervous all the time. Psychological safety is like relational insurance. So what it means is that you can go out, try, fail, experiment, take risks, and learn, share your voice because you already matter enough to somebody else, and what you do or don't do, what you say or don't say, won't be threatened. All thriving in life and in work is the result of being able to explore from a secure base. This is true for children who have a secure base when they feel that they have a parent or an adult that they're attached to. When people have that secure attachment, research finds they're more resilient. They are more likely to go out and create better relationships. They're more likely to think creatively because they know that nothing is going to threaten that they matter to another person. I believe that all psychological safety is adult attachment at work, right? It's having that secure base. Or I already matter enough to another person so I can go out, take risks, speak up, and not have that mattering threatened. So it's that idea of like, as a leader, you are that secure base from which people can launch out and innovate and make mistakes, experiment, all the things that come when we foster psychological safety. But I think psychological safety is really mattering in disguise.
Yeah, well, I guess it's about creating that environment. And it's an interesting one because we want to individually make people feel like they matter, but then in a team context as well, we want to make the team feel like they matter too. And how do we do it in a way as a leader so that everyone feels like they matter rather than it just being certain people in the team or your go-to person, etc.
Yeah, and one of my favorite examples was when NASA was launching the Apollo missions. to put a person on the moon, which was a ridiculous mission, and it was not even clear whether it could be achieved. But NASA had over 300,000 contract workers working for them, many of whom would not even be contracted when they achieved this mission that nobody knew whether or not they could achieve it. And one of the stories that comes out of that time period is often retold without context. And the story is that John F. Kennedy, who was the president at the time, went to a space center to give a speech launching the missions and saw a janitor there and said to the janitor, "Hey, what do you do here?" And the janitor very calmly said, "Oh, I'm putting a person on the moon." Right? Just knew why what they did contributed to something bigger. But one of the things that researchers have found since studying NASA's management techniques during that time is that almost every NASA group during that time had what was called a ladder to the moon. At the top of the ladder was the bigger mission, the bigger purpose to put a person on the moon by the end of the decade. But at the bottom of the ladder was that individual or group's tasks for that month. The next rung up was a tangible, measurable objective that task was needed for. The next rung up was a tangible, measurable objective that task was needed for. And they could see measurably how they were putting a person on the moon by the end of the decade. But how this relates to teaming is that team members had to create ladders to each other's work.
Oh, I love that.
So here's my work, and then I would have to create stepping stones to your work. So here's how I do my work, and here's how it measurably impacts your work. And one of the key things is that they had people revisit these ladders to each other's work regularly. And this is also why I think it's not just on the leader to create mattering. Some people ask me, "Hey, what if my leader doesn't do this for me?" And I often say, "Do you do it for them?" Mattering is non-directional. It happens in everyday interactions and it happens through relationships. So as peers, peer to peer, we need to be making sure that we're noticing each other,
Mhm.
that we're affirming each other's peer to peers unique gifts, that we're laddering our work to their work and vice versa. And that's what creates a true team culture of mattering. And then the leader upholds and models the behaviors that they say they want in those interactions and serves as that overall model and architect of how we want to be together on this team.
I love that because I do a lot of work with teams around the shared goals and shared accountability that we hold, and also between teams, the interdependencies between and how interconnected we are.
Mm.
We're more interconnected than we realize often. And we often don't have build those relationships or have those conversations about, well, these are my priorities and these are your priorities. And this is where there might be differences, and how do we reprioritize and how do we get on the same page? And I like the ladder, the NASA ladder, and getting that visibility. I think that's great.
Yeah, there's 3 elements that we've seen that, like, at all levels, any relationship, peer to peer, leader to follower, that people need to experience to feel that they matter. They need to be noticed. We've talked a little bit about that, seeing people, understanding the details of their work and their lives, understanding how they're doing from an energy and emotion standpoint, feeling heard. They also need to feel affirmed. They need to know that their unique gifts and talents actually make a difference for you and for the bigger picture. And then they need to feel that they're needed, and I love that you use that word interdependent, which just means needed by another. We need to feel that we're needed and that our work and that our inputs are essential for the people around us. And that's what cultivates mattering for a team.
I love that. Noticed, affirmed, and needed. I guess with the NASA example you gave around laddering, I often talk about the 4 levels of purpose. There's the organization's purpose, there's the team's purpose, there's the meaningful work that you do every day and how you contribute to it. And then there's your own individual values and how does a leader make the connection between those. And I can kind of see the inference to the laddering. I know it's more about task as
Mhm.
well. But how do you suggest leaders help people draw meaning from their work?
Yeah, well, meaning is crafted, so it's not
Mm,
made or it's not found, and someone
mm,
doesn't give it to you.
yeah.
So we make meaning through interactions. We make meaning with each other. So I think that's really important. That's why, like, you can have a job that matters and not experience mattering in your job. Many organizational purpose initiatives fail because they do all this work to develop an organizational purpose, but then people feel unseen, unheard, and unvalued every day in daily interactions. There is no purpose statement, no matter how well worded, that can make up for the daily experience of feeling insignificant to the people around you. And again, it goes back to that interactional level. So, like one way, for example, we is through affirmation. Affirmation is different than just appreciation or recognition. So appreciation is showing general gratitude for who someone is. You could do that through an employee appreciation week or an event or an award. Recognition is showing gratitude for what someone does. It's elevating their work. You can give that, you can recognize someone through a bonus or a pay increase. But affirmation is showing somebody exactly how their unique gifts make a unique difference. One of the ways to do that is just in everyday gratitude, like how you say thank you or good job. Instead of just saying thank you or good job, leaders who tend to have employees who have high levels of mattering, we find tend to go beyond the good job and they show people exactly how they make a unique difference. There are four components to meaningful gratitude. One is describe when and where it happened. So be very specific about what you're observing. That helps you become a noticer, not just the person that says thank you generically every day. Second, name the specific behaviors. Be very clear on what those behaviors are. Third is describe the unique gifts the person used. So this is what's interesting. There are four major gifts that everybody brings us every day. Their strengths, what they love to do and what they're good at. Their purpose, how only they impact the team. Their perspective, how only they see the work and the world. And their wisdom, what only they can teach the team. So name those things. I see that you are incredibly creative. And then tell them exactly how it adds value, what the impact is, and name it very clearly. And, when people walked out of that meeting today, because you were creative and synthesized everybody's ideas, I could see them smiling in the hallway a little bit more. There was a little bit of stress release. I just want to thank you for that. You did that. I mean, that's just one example of how we can move beyond just the, hey, thanks, hey, good job, to more meaningful affirmation. One of my favorite practices, if you want to use this, is I got to work with a national park in the West in the United States. They have a very difficult time recruiting and retaining maintenance workers. They work in like a really inhospitable environment in the desert, and they had really high turnover, low morale. And then the supervisor took over. And within a couple years, he had like double the amount of job applications, engagement was up, like turnover was down. And so the Park Service asked me to go talk to him about what he was doing and try to scale that. And he really had a simple practice. He would go around and he would take pictures of projects his team worked on. So that week, like if it was a bridge that was repaired and there were park visitors walking over it, he would take a picture. If there was a bathroom that had a shorter line because a bathroom was repaired and it was reopened, he would just snap a picture. If there was a family using a trail, he would snap a picture. And on Friday morning, he sent this email. And in the email, the subject line was just, look what you did. And he would just attach the photos every week. And I loved that because he said, my people can't question whether they make a difference or not. I give them photographic evidence every week.
Mm, I love that. I think one, it talks to the impact that they're having and the outcome, but I think that visual goes to show that, like, I see you, like, I visually see what you're doing, like, I've observed it. It's not like third hand, like,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
proof of impact. And
yeah.
that's why I always say, like, when we look at leaders who do this well, good leaders tend to tell people that they matter. They tend to have
Mm,
slogans like our people are our greatest asset, or people first, or we care about our people. Good leaders tell people that they matter, but great leaders have the skills and deliberate practices to show them exactly how they matter.
mm,
They have the skill set to show them that the real evidence of their significance regularly, and they don't leave it up to chance. And I think that knowing that it's a skill and a practice is a key differentiator.
yeah. So, I was facilitating a senior leader forum at the end of last year, and the most senior person in the room sort of had a mic dropping moment where we were talking about purpose and the 4 levels of purpose, and sort of said, look, I have to say something, shareholders don't care about purpose, they care about profit. And the kind of room went silent. And I'm keen to kind of get your perspective of when you hear that, and, what does your research and experience say in response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, maybe they don't, but name one financial metric that's not mediated through a human being,
Mm,
right? Name one indicator that shareholders invest in and care about that is not mediated through how a human being feels in an organization, their energy.
mm,
And there isn't one. He's talking, or she is talking about lagging indicators, profit, that is delivered to a shareholder. The leading indicator of profit of any activity in an organization that generates profit is human energy. Think about the last time a human being that you know or you yourself has been energized when you felt that you or it didn't matter. Even if I talk to a CEO and the CEO is like, well, we need to keep the lights on. Like, if we don't make money, like, no one will have a job. But, the reason I pay people, that should be thanks enough. When I talk to people like that, I often say, okay, name one financial metric that's not mediated through a human being. They can't name one. And then I say, okay, what's the ideal state of a human being who's performing and producing here? And guess what they tell me? They tell me they should be motivated. They should be committed. They should have what they need to do their job. They should feel supported. And so I say, oh, so they should feel that they matter. Oh, yeah, they should. Okay, what resources are we investing into rigorously pursuing the skills, scaling the leadership skills needed to ensure everybody feels that way in order for them to produce? And there's often this gigantic pause. And the pause is a result of the fact that we pursue lagging indicators that we can measure clearly. And we neglect the leading indicators, which is why we have persistent, perpetual turnover issues in organizations, which is why we have persistent, perpetual disengagement issues in organizations, which is why you and I have a job.
And with this, there's what work.
There's a lot of work to do, is
Yeah.
because we haven't rigorously pursued and scaled and maintained and measured people on the skills needed to be with one another in a healthy way that regenerates human energy. We've put a lot of rigor on balance sheets, budgets, processes, products, product strategies, financial strategies, benefit structures, programs, platforms, and very few resources into interactions that really bring energy forth.
So, Zach, how does someone understand what their purpose is and find meaning at work?
Yeah. So, like, my question is, okay, so when you're on that call or preparing for that meeting, you're making dinner for your family at the same time, right? I mean, so like, really, like, you're literally like providing for your family in that moment. No, you're doing it because at some point you care about something in that moment. Like, there's no like paycheck that, like, because you show up well, just pops out of the blue as an instant reward.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, like, one of the things to think about with that is people confuse the meaning of work with meaning in work. Like, the meaning of work for that person might be to put food on the table or to provide for their family. But the meaning in work is what they experience when they're there. And that actually has more of an impact on performance at work, that well-being at work, productivity, than does why you work.
So, Zach, if you could leave our listeners with one message about thriving teams, what would that be?
When people feel that they matter, they act like they matter, right? They show up and they commit. And I think the best question you can take if your head is sort of spinning from this conversation is, because I know we went in a lot of different directions, the best question you could take forward and ask the people that you serve, anybody you serve, it could be your family, it could be your friends, it could be any relationship, it could be your team, is ask them, when you feel that you matter to me, what am I doing? When you feel that you matter here, what are we doing? And you'll be surprised, but you'll have data and do more of those things. I mean, that's the best place to start.
I love that. Asking so you actually get the data points back to understand how you're going to show people that they do matter, and then doing more of that. Zach, I've loved our conversation. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm looking forward to sharing this with our listeners.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Wow, what a great episode with Zach. I got a lot of value and also now fully appreciate the power of helping people feel like they matter, that they know that they're significant, that they're seen, heard, and valued. So how are you showing your teams that they matter? A few things that I took away is the power of the so what. Not just what they're doing, but what their work leads to. What is the impact? Who does it help? Why does it matter? As leaders, we often don't hold that bigger picture, and part of our role is to connect those dots. I also really loved his distinction between recognition and affirmation. Recognition saying good job, and affirmation is this is your unique strength you brought, and this is the difference it made. It helps us have more powerful feedback conversations so people really know what it is that you appreciate about them and affirming that. And the final point that I took away is that psychological safety might actually be mattering in disguise, because people are more likely to speak up, take risks, learn and contribute if they know that they won't be threatened. And by showing them that they matter, you create that environment for them. So ask yourself the question, when you feel that you matter here, what are you doing? Or even ask your team, when they feel like they matter, what is it that you're doing as the leader? That question gives you data points, and then your job is to do more of those things. Because when your team feels like they matter, they act like they matter. They'll be more engaged, they'll contribute more, they'll take more ownership and accountability. And that's what thriving teams are built on. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the Thriving Leaders podcast. Thanks for joining us at the Thriving Leaders podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our leadership programs, facilitation, keynote speaking, or executive or team coaching, head to our website, www.thrivingculture.com.au. This is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, where I share useful tips on leadership and team development, as well as our podcast. You can also grab a copy of either of my books on our website, and it's also available on all good online retailers, including Audible, Spotify, and Kindle. If you like this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review, as it helps us reach more people and therefore helps more leaders thrive. Please subscribe.